Smithereens is, without a doubt, my favourite episode of Season 5. There's something more intelligent and interesting about Smithereens that I couldn't quite put my finger on until writing this video. It's intense, it's realistic, and it was the episode that stuck with me the most just because it feels the most relevant in these technological times. It's basically Charlie Brooker's op-ed to big tech companies that have nullified our attention spans and are getting filthy, stinking rich from their addicting mobile apps and social media platforms. We have our fictional modifications of Facebook and Twitter, but it was super clear to me who exactly the show was pointing fingers towards without being too on the nose about it. This video will analyze and outline what makes this episode so effective and gripping to watch, so without further ado, let's get on with the review. The episode eases us in with our protagonist Chris listening to a guided meditation in his car. Unfortunately, he is unable to concentrate for too long as his smartphone bleeps to get his attention. This moment is important because it encapsulates the issue Chris has in the first few moments of the episode. It seems insignificant at first, merely establishing this character's occupation, but the notifications, be they for employment or social, distract us from truly doing the things we want to do. In Chris's case, he can't truly appreciate the benefits of meditation because of his temporary employment. There's even a little nod to the episode nosedive on his phone screen, as the job he's been sent has a user rating of the person who booked it instead of the driver. We do learn later on that he is choosing to be this pretender rideshare driver for his own malicious reasons, so it's easy to put the blame on him for not simply making time for meditating. The meditating's primary purpose is to connect our protagonist with the antagonist, as one appears to be starting out and the other is an expert. The show seems to be recommending meditation for the audience as a detox from being constantly tied down to our devices, considering one criticism that is normally directed at this show is how it doesn't provide solutions to the issues it raises. There are definitely other benefits from the practice, and speaking from personal experience, I can definitely recommend it as a method of reclaiming your concentration and appreciation of your existence. I did really like that short moment in Dan's cafe where Chris tries not to pay mind to all the people with their phones out. The sound of the buzzing light magnifies the repeating vibrations of mobile phones, and all the sound effects escalate in volume. This seems to describe Chris's agitation at his surroundings more than what is actually happening. You'd be hard-pressed to find a cafe in London that is literally this noisy with phone activity. More importantly though, whenever I hear that click sound whenever somebody types or taps their screen, I feel that it just comes off as goofy and out of date at this point. From here, the story has not only established all of this, but has even alluded to the incredible wealth gap that has accumulated between giant tech companies and ordinary people. Chris's first fare is a woman who describes the Smithereen headquarters as having a spa built inside. Even the intern Jaden has a first-class reservation waiting for him, with the instructions of delivering clothes to an executive just so she can pick one out. The fact our protagonist is also working class makes the wealth gap even more apparent, but even this is a deception. His whole purpose in enacting this role as a driver is to make a statement, just like the unseen kidnapper in the national anthem. He, by proxy, embodies a large demographic of people that are predicted to be replaced by automated vehicles in the next few decades. The AI that will be driving these vehicles is being pioneered at these tech companies, and so a natural distrust in them arises from these individuals. Chris finds more reason to distrust social media companies when he sees how they have made somebody else's life a total misery too. A woman whose daughter committed suicide is hooked on trying to get into her account in an attempt to get closure and possibly a reason for her death. It's become a ritual for her, with a book full of potential passwords that she tries 3 of every midnight. Like Chris's fiancé, the company's involvement in the death of a loved one is indirect but is having an emotional toll on both of these characters because of policies and programming that isn't in anybody's interest other than advertisers. I think Brooker is trying to make the connection between depression, anxiety, and suicide with social media through these characters. Depression in university students, according to Jonathan Haidt, has risen significantly since the introduction of social media, and I think using this specific circumstance of suicide in the story was to raise awareness of this trend. Basically, the story establishes at this point that it's not not looking good for social media companies, and most people have some form of grievance towards them now that the public are becoming aware of their shady tactics and policies. I really like the design of the Smithereen logo. We have an exclamation mark surrounded by a speech bubble coated in this luminous green color. I'd like to think this design reflects what Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey has now mantrified as promoting healthy conversation on their platform. This logo acts as a metaphor for the sterilization of conversation social media companies engage in, and the same green-yellowy color is seen both on the floor of the Smithereen headquarters and in the color of certain staff members' clothing. This isn't the only reference to Jack Dorsey we see in the episode either. Jack famously went on a 10-day silent retreat in Myanmar. After tweeting about his experience, he would receive considerable backlash for not acknowledging the political turmoil that was taking place during his visit. This is notable because we see this same disillusionment reflected in Billy's character after he's heard everything Chris has to say to him on the phone, and this is the reason I claim Smithereen to be based off of Twitter, not Facebook. Chris then has his Smithereen employee sat in the back of his car. He claims the road is going to get a bit twisty, which is then followed up with these gorgeous shots of the English countryside roads that are literally twisting on what I presume to be a drone. This twisting style of shot is repeated on another road just after the pair have changed cars. This shot is used to visualize the claustrophobic and nauseous experience of Jaden onto the viewer. We also get this uneasy feeling from Andrew Scott's performance. His attempts to command and reassure simultaneously with brief fits of anger demonstrate instability of the highest caliber. He's so disappointed at himself for picking an intern and not somebody higher up the chain of command, but also angry at how long it took Jaden to realize he wasn't going to Heathrow Airport until it was too late. Things start gearing up in this field where the remainder of the episode takes place. I liked how the power lines are such a dominant presence in these scenes. They act as symbols of the constant flow of information and communication that are present during this escalating situation. From the radio chatter of the police to the social media explosion that's happening too, these towers dominate the frames as though they themselves are broadcasting all the information that's being exchanged. The methodical cinematography really complements the narrative of this episode. Interestingly, Smithereens was directed by the same guy that directed Season 3's finale Hated in the Nation, which has the same geometric way of filming people and places, with a similar fascination with establishing shots and extreme close-ups. They may feel a bit empty because one might conclude they didn't even consider the rest of the frame, but for what the episode is trying to convey, I think the cinematography works far more in Smithereens' favour than Hated in the Nation, as will become more evident as we get further into the episode. When Chris tries getting Billy Bauer on the phone, they place him on hold with Radiohead's song Daydreaming playing in the background. Anybody familiar with this show by now will be aware of the rather deliberate selection of music they use for the show, and this choice is no exception. The lyrics of the song aren't heard, but the first verse is as follows. Dreamers, they never learn, beyond the point of no return. Then it's too late, the damage is done. I'm somewhat doubtful vocalist Tom York had social media in mind when writing this song, but its application as a stress buster on behalf of a giant corporation seems almost bitterly ironic, in that you can imagine these words spinning around Chris's head with the dreamer being Billy Bauer. The platform he envisaged has now gone beyond the point of no return. What's even more interesting is the ending of this song, which ties into the episode too. Although we don't hear it played, the outro of Daydreaming contains the phrase "half my life," hauntingly reversed and repeated. Fans have speculated that this is a reference to how long Tom York had spent with his longtime partner Rachel Owen, who he had been with for 23 years. Chris in this episode also has his own mantra, repeating the phrase "this is my last day" over and over again. If our protagonist in this story also has a tragic death impeded on him, and how neatly the first verse also ties into the story, how could this song choice be anything other than deliberate when it complements the narrative so well? At this point, several factions and influencers start getting involved, painting a bigger picture of the event as a result of the social media company liaising with the FBI and advising the police on the ground. I also really appreciated the insignificance of the negotiator, who sticks out like a clown amongst the police officers, trying to be the hero of the situation. This would have worked more effectively if the humor of this scene didn't deflate the seriousness of the situation that had been established. It's when the negotiator gets in his car and off that we see a handheld camera following his car away, mixed with these gratuitous zooms that make it look like something you'd see in The Office or a bad documentary. It contrasts so horribly with the rest of the very tightly structured cinematography that I couldn't help but laugh at the whole affair despite trying to come off as intense. Maybe that's the point, in which case kudos to you makers of Black Mirror, but it nagged me all the same. The shots of Billy's retreat are stunning. His tiny glass hut is shown against the huge hot desert of emptiness. As this character Tippy approaches, glass on the ceiling reflects her in this disfigured way. Accompanied by the immense heat we see radiating all around, this builds up a feeling of dread as we anticipate the outrage to come from Billy should he be disturbed. The music leading up to this moment sounds like breathing, but almost mechanical or steam-like in tone. It sounds almost Darth Vader-ish and ties in nicely with Billy meditating too. This was a great introduction to the antagonist of the story, who had remained elusive and mysterious up until this point, but turns out to be more chill than anybody else in the story. His reaction to being informed of what's going on in the UK is more akin to somebody dying in a video game than that of a CEO. Not only is he dressed up like a modern Jesus, but he enables God mode too. This example ties in with Chris too, because nobody seems to take either of them seriously.
Is this a joke?
No!
When Billy tries to command his staff members, they hesitate or outright refuse to give him Chris's phone number, so he uses his intelligence to get what he wants too. It feels more crushing that the CEO of a social media company isn't taken seriously either, probably because, as he later describes, nothing is in his hands anymore. His executive decisions are probably aimed at preventing lawsuits instead of actually delivering a service or product that isn't addictive or suicide-inducing. Back in the UK, the next part of Chris's plan gets put into motion by telling Jaden his gun isn't real, all to test if the people are listening to him. This was interesting because it seemed to me like Chris was trying to induce some form of Stockholm syndrome into Jaden as the story progressed, and he's evidently successful. Jaden recommends Chris handing himself in for a lighter sentence. He also alerts Chris to the oncoming police trying to creep up on him, and even at the end he tries to urge Chris not to kill himself because of the impact it will have on his family. Tragically though, Chris no longer has any family, so he has nothing to lose. But possibly the most dramatic moment of the episode is ruined because the money shot was used in the trailer for season 5. Now the marketing team is more to blame than anybody else for this, but a lot had been building up to this moment, only for us to know the outcome of it before it even came. What makes matters worse is that the shot of the bullet hole in the window with Andrew Scott in the corner, it's almost like they were saying, hey dummy audience, you know that logo Black Mirror's been hogging for years? Well, they finally managed to put it into an episode. Just gotta draw a smiley face here and put a big arrow next to it and boom, you've got a lovely clickbait thumbnail for a top 10 Easter eggs video. After much delay, Chris and Billy talk on the phone, and as the conversation goes on, the camera frames our characters in rather uncomfortable positions to amplify the eggshells the two are treading on just to have this conversation. At first, it shows Chris pressed into the left half of the frame, where we hear him tell his story of how a distraction from a phone took him away from the wheel so briefly, but that was all that was needed. It would be easy to simplify the intention behind this story as just warning people not to text whilst driving, but because of the direction of the episode, I doubt we can simply leave it at that. Even if Chris hadn't been notified at all, he describes being bored every 10 seconds just driving, and he probably would have checked the phone whether he'd been notified or not. It connects back to an earlier scene when Chris complains about how the company has got everyone checking and being distracted all throughout the day from the problems of the real world, all in pursuit of profit, considering advertisers pay big bucks to get people looking at their products all day, which is the current model for these platforms for the foreseeable future. Chris is able to confess to his crime to the man who designed the weapon of this murder. They become partners in crime. Chris only wanted to share his story to give Billy the poke he needed to change the platform around. His plan was the only way he could get one man in a high tower's attention, and then we see the close-up on Billy's face. Exactly the same framing as Chris earlier on, but the blame has been passed on. The cries of thousands are alongside Chris that these social media companies have optimized themselves for engagement and profit, tainting their reputations. There's something also to be be said about the robotically corporate way Penelope, the COO of Smithereen, tries to patronize Chris like he's just another customer with a complaint. She stalls for time early on in the episode for Billy's benefit, continuing to hide from the responsible thing. Finally, when Chris has finished telling his story, Penn sends over a list of tips for Billy in handling this situation, which just ends up backfiring as Billy realizes his attention has been drawn away from Chris and back onto a screen. Throughout the episode, eyes play a significant role, and it's only until the end that it's made completely apparent to us with this montage. We get plenty of shots showing Chris's eyes in the rearview mirror of his car throughout the story as well, and the final kick is when the song Can't Take My Eyes Off You plays at full blast instead of from the tinny speaker of a smartphone. So, what is the episode suggesting? That we can't trust our eyes? The song is obviously directed at the inability for us to take our eyes away from our phones, but Brooker doesn't want to give us the satisfaction of a complete narrative, for stories in real life aren't that simple. I described Chris and Billy being protagonists-antagonists of this story, but it could definitely be viewed as the other way around. Victims, perpetrators, there's so much grey area that the ending of this episode exploits beautifully. The characters, like the audience, can't take their eyes off a good spectacle. Did they shoot Chris? Or did they accidentally shoot Jaden? Did Chris shoot himself? Did the woman get into her daughter's account? But does it matter? Whatever the outcome, it's disappointing for the viewer, but in a good way. The further away from the event the individual is, like the kid who tweets about the whole thing, the less truth is found, like a giant game of Chinese whispers echoing through our consciousness. We are in fact given a privileged view of all the events, just like the people in this story, but we will never know the outcome, because no matter what, it ends in disaster. Thanks for watching. Please support the channel on Patreon so you can see your name here, and I'm also planning on releasing some horrendous homemade desktop backgrounds I've made for patrons at some point too. So hey, you can actually get something extra out of me for once. What did you think of Smithereens? Leave a comment below or join us for a chinwag on the Discord server where we will continue this discussion. Camera frames our characters in rather uncomfortable positions to amplify the eggshells the two are treading on just to have this conversation and run out of breath.